The desert heat pressed against my face like a furnace door swinging open. But nothing could have prepared me for what lay beneath the shifting sands of Jordan. My name is Dr. Brandon Clark, and for the past 15 years, I've dedicated my life to one purpose: proving that the biblical accounts aren't just stories, but historical records waiting to be uncovered. The Covenant Research Institute doesn't officially exist. Our funding comes from shadowy benefactors who understand that some truths are too dangerous for public consumption. We've uncovered Noah's Ark fragments in Turkey, identified the actual location of Sodom and Gomorrah, and traced the Exodus route through satellite imagery. But this discovery, this would change everything. Brandon, you need to see this immediately. Dr. Madison Wade's voice crackled through my headset, cutting through the mechanical hum of the excavation equipment. Madison had been my partner on 6 previous digs, and I'd never heard that particular tremor in her voice before. I descended the aluminum ladder into the excavation pit, each rung taking me deeper into what we'd initially believed to be a collapsed temple complex. The temperature dropped 20 degrees as I moved below ground level, and the familiar smell of ancient dust and limestone filled my nostrils. Our portable floodlights cast harsh shadows against the tunnel walls, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that made my pulse quicken. "How deep are we now?" I called out, my voice echoing off the carved stone passages. 47 feet and counting, replied Ben O'Connor, our security specialist. O'Connor was former military, recruited specifically for expeditions like this one. His job was to keep us safe from tomb robbers and hostile locals. But as I descended deeper, I wondered if we might need protection from something else entirely. The tunnel system was unlike anything I'd encountered in 2 decades of biblical archaeology. The passage widths were enormous, easily 12 feet across and 15 feet high. The craftsmanship was immaculate, with perfectly carved stone blocks fitted together without mortar, similar to the construction techniques found at Baalbek in Lebanon. But the scale was different. Everything was built for occupants much larger than normal humans. "Dr. Clark, over here." Madison's voice drew me toward a side chamber where she stood beside Dr. Abraham Stern, our expedition leader. Stern was in his 70s, a legend in biblical archaeology, who'd spent his career chasing the same mysteries that consumed me. What I saw in that chamber stopped me cold. The skeleton stretched nearly 14 feet from skull to pelvis, its bones thick and dense, preserved in a way that defied natural explanation. The rib cage was massive, designed for a creature that would have stood close to 18 feet tall when living. But it wasn't just the size. It was the perfection of preservation. After what should have been thousands of years, the bones looked as though they'd been interred yesterday. "Carbon dating?" I whispered, afraid to speak too loudly in the presence of such an incredible discovery. "Preliminary readings suggest approximately 10,000 years," Stern replied, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "But Marcus, that's not the most remarkable part." He led me around the skeleton to where additional floodlights illuminated the chamber walls. Carved into the stone were Hebrew characters, but older than any biblical Hebrew I'd ever encountered. The letters were enormous, each one nearly 6 inches tall, as if written by hands much larger than human. "Can you translate it?" I asked, though I already knew Stern's capabilities with ancient languages. "Fragments only. But what I can make out..." He paused, running his finger along one of the carved lines. "It speaks of the Nephilim, the giants mentioned in Genesis. There were giants in the earth in those days." The hair on my arms stood up. Every biblical scholar knew the passage from Genesis 6:4, but seeing potential evidence of its literal truth was overwhelming. Madison moved past us to examine what appeared to be burial goods. Massive bronze weapons and tools designed for hands twice the size of a normal human's. "This changes everything," I said, barely able to contain my excitement. "If this is authentic, if these are really the remains of the Nephilim, then we're not just looking at archaeological evidence. We're looking at proof that biblical accounts are historical records." "There's more," O'Connor called from the far end of the chamber. "Much more." We followed him through another passage that opened into a vast underground chamber. Our lights barely penetrated the darkness, but what we could see made us all stop breathing. Skeletal remains were arranged in rows, dozens of them, all of similar enormous proportions. It was a burial ground, a necropolis for giants. My God, Madison whispered. How many are there? I count at least 40 from this vantage point, O'Connor replied, sweeping his high-powered flashlight across the chamber. But the chamber extends beyond our light range. I walked between the rows of ancient remains, my footsteps echoing in the vast space. Each skeleton told a story of beings that had once walked the earth as living creatures. The bone structure suggested incredible physical strength, but also intelligence. Tools and weapons were buried with each body, and the arrangement suggested ritual burial practices. The preservation is impossible, Madison said, kneeling beside one of the skeletons. In this climate, in this environment, organic material should have decomposed millennia ago. But look at this. She held up what appeared to be leather strapping from a piece of armor. It's as supple as if it were made yesterday. Dr. Stern had moved to examine the chamber walls, which were covered in the same oversized Hebrew characters we'd found in the first chamber. Brandon, these inscriptions, they're not just burial records. They're warnings. Warnings about what? I'm still translating, but the repeated phrases suggest something was meant to remain buried, something that shouldn't be disturbed. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the underground temperature. I'd spent my career seeking proof of biblical truths, but I'd never considered that some of those truths might have been buried for good reason. As we continued our examination, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Several of the burial sites showed signs of recent disturbance. Ancient stone slabs had been moved, and there were scuff marks in the millennia-old dust that looked fresh. O'Connor, I called out, keeping my voice steady despite the growing unease. Have you noticed any signs of recent activity down here? He moved to where I stood, examining the disturbed burial site. His military training made him immediately alert to details I might have missed. These marks are recent. Very recent. Someone or something has been moving through here within the last few weeks. That's impossible, Madison said, joining us. We're the first expedition to reach this depth. The tunnels above were completely sealed. Then how do you explain this? O'Connor pointed to a clear handprint in the dust beside one of the moved stone slabs. The print was enormous, easily twice the size of a normal human hand. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If these creatures had been dead for 10,000 years, how could there be fresh signs of movement? How could there be handprints that suggested something massive had recently been active in these burial chambers? We need to document everything and get out of here, I said, my scientific excitement now tempered by genuine concern. There's something we're not understanding about this place. But as I spoke, a sound echoed through the vast chamber that made us all freeze. It was a low, resonant vibration that seemed to come from the stone itself, like a heartbeat emanating from the very walls around us. Did you hear that? Madison whispered. We stood in absolute silence, waiting. The sound came again, deeper this time, and definitely not natural. It was rhythmic, purposeful, and it was coming from somewhere deeper in the chamber complex. Pack the equipment, I ordered. We're leaving, now. But as we gathered our tools and documentation, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had disturbed something that was never meant to be found. The biblical warnings about the Nephilim suddenly seemed less like ancient superstition and more like historical caution. Something massive had once walked the earth, and if the signs were accurate, something massive might be walking again. We didn't sleep that night. How could we? The rhythmic vibrations continued throughout the dark hours, echoing up from the depths below like a massive heart refusing to stay silent. By dawn, we'd made a decision that would change everything. We had to go deeper. The sound is coming from approximately 200 feet below our current position, O'Connor reported, studying the seismic readings on his tablet. His military precision was reassuring, but I could see the tension in his jaw. There's definitely a larger chamber system down there. Multiple chambers. Actually, this whole complex is far more extensive than we initially thought. Dr. Stern spread the ancient Hebrew translations across our makeshift table. During the sleepless night, he'd managed to decipher more of the wall inscriptions, and what he'd discovered made my hands tremble as I read his notes. Coffee had gone cold in my cup hours ago, but caffeine was the last thing on my mind. Brandon, "These aren't just burial records," he said, his weathered face grave in the morning light. "They're historical accounts, battle reports. These inscriptions describe a war that lasted for generations. The detail is extraordinary. They mention specific battles, casualty counts, tactical strategies. I studied his translation notes, my background in biblical archaeology helping me fill in the gaps. The Hebrew was archaic, older than anything in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but the military terminology was unmistakable. War between whom? The Nephilim and humanity. But there's more." He pointed to a series of symbols he'd copied from the deepest chamber. "These references speak of corruption, of something that turned the giants against their original nature. The repeated word here," he tapped a particular symbol, "translates roughly to the Whisperer, or the Deceiver. But the context suggests something far more sinister than a simple enemy commander." Madison looked up from her anthropological analysis of the skeletal remains. She'd been working through the night, cataloging bone fragments and studying trauma patterns. The bone structure shows signs of extensive trauma. Battle wounds, yes, but also something else. "Look at this." She held up a giant skull, pointing to strange markings along the cranium. "These aren't weapon marks. They're modifications. As if something was surgically altering their brain structure." The implications sent a chill through me. Modifications for what purpose? Control, possibly, or enhancement. The neural pathways show signs of artificial expansion, particularly in the regions associated with aggression and pain tolerance. She set the skull down carefully. "Brandon, these weren't just peaceful deaths. These giants died fighting, but they died fighting something that had fundamentally changed them." Over the next 3 days, we systematically explored deeper into the complex. What we found defied everything I thought I knew about ancient history. The walls of the lower chambers were covered in elaborate murals, painted with pigments that somehow retained their vivid colors after millennia. The artwork was sophisticated, showing a level of artistic skill that rivaled the greatest masterpieces of human civilization. The murals told a story that should have been impossible. The first mural sequence showed giants and humans living in harmony. The giants were depicted as protectors, teachers, sharing knowledge with smaller human figures. I could see depictions of giants teaching humans agriculture, astronomy, metallurgy. They were mentors, not masters. The artwork showed genuine cooperation, even affection between the two races. But as the paintings progressed along the chamber walls, the story darkened. A shadowy figure appeared in the artwork. Something that wasn't quite human, wasn't quite giant, but something else entirely. It was consistently portrayed as a presence of pure darkness, sometimes with multiple eyes, sometimes with wings, but always radiating an aura of malevolent intelligence. "Look at this sequence!" Madison called out, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. She stood before a section of wall where the murals depicted the shadow figure speaking to groups of giants. The artwork shows this entity corrupting them, turning them against humanity. But look at the progression. It's not immediate. It's gradual, insidious. The panels showed the corruption spreading like a disease. Giants who had been teachers became slavers. Those who had been protectors became destroyers. The shadow figure appeared to be whispering to them, and with each whisper, the giants in the artwork became more monstrous, more inhuman. "It's psychological warfare," O'Connor observed, his military background helping him interpret the tactical elements. This entity didn't just corrupt them, it strategically turned them against their own nature. "Look here." He pointed to a panel showing giants destroying their own cities. It made them destroy everything they had built with humanity. The subsequent panels showed the results of that corruption. Giants attacking human settlements, humans fleeing in terror, entire civilizations burning. But the artwork revealed something crucial. Not all giants were corrupted. Some fought against their transformed brethren, standing with the humans they had once protected. "The humans fought back," I whispered, studying a mural that showed human warriors standing alongside uncorrupted giants. The alliance was clearly desperate, outnumbered, fighting for survival against overwhelming odds. They formed an alliance with the remaining loyal giants. Dr. Stern had been examining inscriptions below the murals. The text confirms it. Some giants remained loyal to humanity. They helped in the war against their corrupted brethren. But the cost was enormous. The inscriptions speak of entire bloodlines being wiped out, of human civilizations that simply vanished from history. The artwork showed battle after battle, each one more desperate than the last. The loyal giants and humans developed new weapons, new tactics, but the corrupted giants seemed to grow stronger with each victory. The shadow figure appeared more frequently in the later panels, no longer just whispering, but actively participating in the battles. "This entity," Madison said, studying a panel where the shadow figure was shown commanding corrupted giants, "it's not just influencing them, it's controlling them directly. Look at their eyes in these later panels. They're all black, just like..." She didn't finish the sentence, but we all knew what she meant. The same black eyes we'd seen in some of the skeletal remains. The final panels in the sequence showed a massive battle, with the shadow figure at its center. But the ending was unclear. The artwork seemed to suggest victory, but at a terrible cost. The loyal giants were shown performing some kind of ritual, binding the shadow figure, but many of them were dying in the process. "We need to find the source of those vibrations," I decided. "If these accounts are accurate, there might be more chambers below. Maybe even answers about what really happened to end this war." It took us another full day to locate the entrance to the lower levels. Hidden behind a false wall in the deepest chamber, we found a stone door covered in warning inscriptions. The Hebrew characters were different here. Older, more primitive, but the message was clear even before Stern translated it. "Do not wake the sleeping king," he read aloud. "Let the bound one remain bound. The price of freedom is the world's ending." O'Connor's military training made him cautious. Maybe we should consider the possibility that these warnings are meant to be heeded. We've already found evidence of one war that nearly destroyed civilization. Do we really want to risk starting another? But scientific curiosity won over caution. We'd come too far to turn back now. The mysteries we'd uncovered demanded answers, and the vibrations from below seemed to be calling to us, drawing us deeper into the ancient complex. The chamber beyond the sealed door was unlike anything we'd encountered. It was enormous, easily 300 feet across and 100 feet high. The ceiling was supported by massive pillars, each one carved with binding symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The air itself felt different here, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl. But it was what occupied the center of the chamber that made us all stop breathing. A sarcophagus. But not just any sarcophagus. This one was massive, carved from a single block of black stone and covered in binding symbols that seemed to move and shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. It was clearly designed for something much larger than the giant skeletons we'd found above. The craftsmanship was incredible, but there was something wrong about it. Something that made my eyes water if I stared too long. "The giant king," Madison whispered. "This has to be the burial place of their leader." But as we approached the sarcophagus, details became clear that made my blood run cold. The binding symbols weren't just decorative, they were functional. Chains of some unknown metal wrapped around the stone coffin, and the locks were still intact after all these millennia. The metal itself seemed to absorb light, creating an aura of darkness around the entire structure. This isn't a tomb, I realized. It's a prison. The walls of this chamber told the final chapter of the story. The murals here showed the shadow figure being betrayed by the giants it had corrupted. The entity had been trapped, bound within the body of the giant king through some ancient ritual involving both humans and giants working together. The artwork showed the ritual in excruciating detail. The sacrifice of dozens of loyal giants, their life force being used to power the binding spell. The corruption was intelligent, Stern said, studying the inscriptions. It was a separate entity that had possessed the giants. But the giants found a way to trap it, to bind it within their king's body before death. The ritual required the willing sacrifice of the last loyal giants. They gave their lives to ensure the entity could never escape. The vibrations we'd been hearing suddenly made terrible sense. They weren't coming from the stone or the earth. They were coming from the sarcophagus itself. Something inside was moving, testing the strength of its ancient bonds. "Something's still alive in there," O'Connor said, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. After 10,000 years, something is still trying to get out. The binding symbols on the sarcophagus were fading, their light growing dimmer with each pulse. Hairline cracks appeared in the black stone, spreading slowly but inexorably across its surface. The ancient chains were showing signs of corrosion, their metal beginning to pit and weaken. That's when we noticed that Madison was missing. "Where's Madison?" I called out, spinning around the chamber. She'd been right behind us when we'd entered, examining the wall murals, but now she was nowhere to be seen. "Madison!" O'Connor shouted, his voice echoing off the chamber walls. "Madison, respond!" Silence. Then, from somewhere in the darkness beyond our lights, we heard her voice. But it was wrong. The tone was different, the cadence strange, as if someone else was learning how to use her vocal cords. "She's not here anymore," the voice said. And it was Madison's voice, but somehow not Madison at all. "She's with us now, in the quiet place between sleeping and waking, where the whispers never end." The thing wearing Madison's voice stepped into our light, and I saw that her eyes were completely black, no whites visible at all. She moved with a fluid grace that was utterly inhuman, despite her familiar form. Her skin had taken on a pale, almost translucent quality, and when she smiled, her teeth seemed sharper than they should be. "The binding grows weak," she said, though her lips barely moved. 10,000 years of imprisonment, and the seals crack like old leather. Soon, the Whisperer will remember what it is to walk among the children of Adam. "Madison, fight it!" I shouted, though I knew instinctively that whatever was speaking through her was far beyond her ability to resist. "She cannot fight what she has become," the entity replied. "Just as you cannot fight what you are about to become. The corruption spreads, Dr. Clark. It spreads through sight, through sound, through the very air you breathe in this sacred place." O'Connor raised his weapon, but I grabbed his arm. That's still Madison's body." "Is it?" the thing asked, tilting Madison's head at an impossible angle. "Or is she simply the first of you to accept what's coming? The giants thought they could bind the Whisperer forever, but they underestimated the power of time, the inevitability of decay." The vibrations from the sarcophagus grew stronger, and I could swear I saw the ancient chains beginning to stretch and strain against their bindings. The binding symbols flickered like dying stars, their power finally beginning to fail after millennia of containment. "The giant king stirs," the entity said through Madison's mouth. "And when he wakes, he will remember the betrayal. He will remember how his own people turned against him, how they helped the humans trap the Whisperer within his flesh. The rage has been building for 10 millennia, Dr. Clark. Can you imagine that kind of anger?" Cracks appeared in the black stone of the sarcophagus, spreading like spiderwebs across its surface. The binding symbols flickered and dimmed, their ancient power finally beginning to fail. Whatever was inside that stone prison was about to break free, and when it did, it would carry with it 10,000 years of accumulated rage and the supernatural power that had once corrupted an entire race of giants. "You came here seeking proof of biblical truth," the entity continued. "But you found something far more dangerous. You found the truth that humanity was never meant to remember. The war isn't over, Dr. Clark. It was only paused." The chains around the sarcophagus began to smoke and hiss, the metal corroding before our eyes. Whatever was inside that stone prison was about to break free, and it would be hungry for revenge against both the giants who had betrayed it and the humans who had helped bind it. "Run," I whispered to O'Connor and Dr. Stern, but my voice seemed to come from far away. The black stone continued to crack, and with each fissure, I felt something cold and alien brushing against my mind, probing for weaknesses, searching for a way in. The Whisperer was waking up, and it was hungry for revenge. The first chain snapped with a sound like thunder, the ancient metal disintegrating into rust-colored dust that drifted through the chamber air. The binding symbols on the sarcophagus flickered like dying candles, their millennia-old power finally failing. Whatever was inside that black stone prison was moments away from freedom. "We need to leave. Now," O'Connor commanded, his military training overriding everything else. He grabbed Dr. Stern's arm, pulling the elderly archaeologist toward the chamber entrance. But I couldn't move. The entity wearing Madison's body was staring at me with those impossibly black eyes, and I felt something invasive probing at the edges of my consciousness. It was like cold fingers exploring my memories, searching for something specific. "You cannot leave, Dr. Clark," the thing said through Madison's lips. "You are the key to understanding what really happened here. Your bloodline carries the memory, even if your conscious mind has forgotten." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, fighting against the mental intrusion. The effort left me dizzy, disoriented. "Your ancestor was here, 10,000 years ago. He was one of the humans who helped perform the binding ritual. The Whisperer remembers him well, remembers his betrayal, his cunning, his sacrifice." The entity smiled with Madison's face, but the expression was wrong, predatory. "You have his eyes, Dr. Clark. The same eyes that watched as the last loyal giants gave their lives to trap the Whisperer in eternal darkness." A second chain snapped, then a third. The black stone was spiderwebbed with cracks now, and through the fissures, I could see something moving inside. Something vast and angry, and very much alive. "The truth is more complex than your simple archaeological interpretations suggest," the entity continued. "Yes, the Whisperer corrupted the giants. Yes, it turned them against humanity. But do you know why?" I wanted to run, wanted to follow O'Connor and Dr. Stern toward the exit, but my legs felt like lead. The mental pressure was increasing, and I realized the entity was using Madison's body as a conduit to access my mind directly. "The giants were dying," it said. "Not from war, not from disease, but from something far more insidious. The same force that created them was slowly withdrawing from the world. They were fading, Dr. Clark, becoming less than they were meant to be." Images flooded my mind. Not my memories, but ancient ones, passed down through generations of genetic memory I didn't know I possessed. I saw giants growing weak, their children born smaller and frailer with each generation. I saw the desperation in their eyes as they realized their race was facing extinction. "The Whisperer offered them a solution," the entity continued. "Not corruption, but preservation. A way to maintain their strength, their purpose, their very existence. The giants who accepted the offer didn't see it as betrayal, they saw it as salvation." "Salvation?" I managed to gasp. "They became monsters. They became survivors. But humanity couldn't accept that. Humans have always feared what they cannot control, what they cannot understand. When the giants changed, when they became something more than human pets and teachers, humanity declared war." The fourth chain snapped, and the vibrations from the sarcophagus became violent, shaking dust from the chamber ceiling. The binding symbols were barely visible now, their light reduced to faint glimmers. "The loyal giants," I started to say, but the entity cut me off. "The loyal giants were fools. They chose extinction over evolution. They chose to die as they were rather than live as they could become. And in their final act of foolishness, they helped humanity trap the only force that could have saved their entire race." Through the genetic memories flooding my mind, I saw the truth of the ancient war. It wasn't the simple good versus evil conflict depicted in the murals. It was a war between two visions of survival, the giants who accepted change, and those who chose traditional mortality. Humanity had simply picked the side that seemed less threatening. "But the Whisperer isn't gone," the entity said. "It has been waiting, learning, growing stronger, and now, after 10,000 years of imprisonment, it understands something it didn't before." "What?" I whispered, though I dreaded the answer. Humanity was never the real enemy. The real enemy was the force that created the giants in the first place, the same force that has been manipulating human development for millennia. The same force that guided your ancestors to this place, that influenced the development of the Covenant Research Institute, that led you specifically to this chamber. The implications hit me like a physical blow. "You're saying we were meant to find this place?" "You were meant to free the Whisperer," the entity confirmed. "Not as its victims, but as its allies. The force that created the giants, call it divine providence, call it cosmic manipulation. It grows stronger with each passing century. It shapes human civilization, guides technological development, influences religious beliefs. It is preparing humanity for something, Dr. Clark. Something that will make the ancient war between giants and humans look like a minor skirmish." The fifth chain snapped, and the sarcophagus began to split open. Through the widening cracks, I could see something that defied description. Not quite flesh, not quite energy, but something that existed in the spaces between physical reality and pure consciousness. The Whisperer was never humanity's enemy, the entity said. It was humanity's potential salvation. The giants who accepted its offer became something greater than human, greater than giant. They became what humanity could become if it chose evolution over extinction. And the ones who refused? I asked, though I already knew the answer. They died. Just as humanity will die if it continues to serve the force that created the giants. The same force that whispers to your world leaders, that guides your scientists, that shapes your understanding of reality itself. Dr. Stern's voice echoed from the chamber entrance. Brandon, the entire complex is becoming unstable. We need to evacuate immediately. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. The genetic memories were showing me something else. The moment of the binding ritual, seen through my ancestors' eyes. The loyal giants hadn't died to trap the Whisperer. They had died to hide it, to preserve it, to keep it safe from the true enemy. You're beginning to understand, the entity said. The binding wasn't a prison. It was a cocoon. The Whisperer has been growing, learning, preparing for the day when humanity would need it most. The sarcophagus split completely open, and the thing inside began to emerge. But it wasn't the monstrous demon I'd expected. It was something far more complex, a swirling mass of consciousness that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. As it rose from the ancient stone, I felt its attention focus on me, and suddenly my mind was flooded with visions of possible futures. I saw humanity enslaved by the same force that had created the giants. I saw Earth transformed into something unrecognizable, with humans reduced to servants of an intelligence so vast and alien that it regarded them as insects. I saw the end of human free will, the end of human choice, the end of everything that made humanity human. But I also saw another possibility. I saw humans and the transformed giants working together, united against the cosmic force that sought to control them both. I saw humanity evolving, becoming something greater than what it was, while still retaining its essential nature. The choice is yours, Dr. Clark, the Whisperer said, and now its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, no longer filtered through Madison's corrupted form. You can flee from this place, return to your institute, and continue serving the force that will eventually destroy your species. Or you can accept the truth and help prepare humanity for what's coming. What about Madison? I demanded. What about my team? They are already changing, the Whisperer replied. The corruption you fear is actually adaptation. They are becoming what they need to become to survive what's coming. The question is whether you will join them or remain trapped in your current limited existence. I looked at Madison's body, and for a moment, her eyes cleared. The blackness faded, and I saw her, the real Madison, looking at me with desperate urgency. Brandon, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It's not what you think. The visions, they're real. Something is coming. Something that makes the ancient war look like a playground fight. The Whisperer isn't our enemy. It's trying to save us. The moment passed, and the blackness returned to her eyes. But in that brief instant, I had seen the truth. The entity wasn't lying about the visions. The genetic memories weren't fabricated. Humanity was facing a threat that it didn't even know existed, and the only force capable of opposing it was the same entity that had once corrupted the giants. The force that created the giants is already here, the Whisperer continued. It has been influencing human development for centuries, guiding you toward a specific evolutionary path. Your technology, your science, your understanding of reality, all of it has been shaped by this force. It is preparing humanity for harvest. Harvest? I echoed. Consciousness is a rare commodity in the universe, Dr. Clark. Intelligence, creativity, the spark of awareness. These things are precious beyond measure. The force that created the giants has been cultivating consciousness on countless worlds, nurturing it, developing it, and then harvesting it for its own purposes. The chamber around us began to change. The ancient stone walls became transparent, revealing the true nature of the complex. It wasn't just an archaeological site. It was a massive containment facility, designed to hold something far more dangerous than the Whisperer. The giants were an experiment, the entity explained. A test to see if consciousness could be enhanced, amplified, made more potent. When the experiment succeeded, the Force moved on to the next phase, human development. You are the latest version of the same experiment, Dr. Clark. Humanity is being prepared for the same fate that befell countless other species across the galaxy. Through the transparent walls, I could see other chambers, other containment facilities, stretching into the distance like a vast underground city. Each one held something different: artifacts, entities, knowledge that had been hidden from human understanding for millennia. The Whisperer has been gathering allies, the entity continued. Other consciousness that refused to be harvested. Other species that chose resistance over surrender. The war that's coming isn't just about Earth. It's about the fate of conscious life in the universe. The weight of the revelation was crushing. Everything I thought I knew about human history, about the nature of reality itself, was wrong. We weren't alone in the universe, but we weren't free either. We were livestock being prepared for slaughter by a force so vast and powerful that it had been manipulating our development for thousands of years. Choose, Dr. Clark, the Whisperer said. Accept the truth and help prepare humanity for what's coming, or remain in ignorance and watch your species be consumed by a force that sees you as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. I looked at Madison, at the changes that were already transforming her. I thought about O'Connor and Dr. Stern, about the billions of people on the surface who had no idea what was coming. I thought about the choice my ancestor had made 10,000 years ago, and the price that choice had exacted. If I accept, I said, what happens to humanity? Humanity survives, the Whisperer replied. Changed, evolved, but still human in all the ways that matter. The alternative is extinction, not just of your species, but of everything that makes consciousness valuable in the universe. The chamber was fully transparent now, and I could see the true scale of the complex. It stretched for miles in every direction. A vast network of containment facilities and hidden knowledge. At its center was something that hurt to look at directly, a presence so alien and powerful that my mind refused to process it completely. That is the real enemy, the Whisperer said. The force that created the giants, that has been shaping human development, that sees conscious life as a commodity to be harvested. It has been waiting for humanity to reach the proper level of development. That time is almost here. I understood now why the giants had been corrupted, why some had chosen to ally with the Whisperer rather than remain loyal to their original nature. They had seen what was coming, had understood the true threat to all conscious life. Their choice hadn't been between good and evil. It had been between transformation and extinction. The binding ritual, I said. My ancestor wasn't trying to trap you. He was trying to hide you. He was trying to preserve the last hope for conscious resistance, the Whisperer confirmed. The giants who participated in the ritual knew they were dying, but they chose to die in service of something greater. They became part of the Whisperer's consciousness, adding their strength to its own. The presence at the center of the complex was stirring, becoming aware of our conversation. I could feel its attention like a weight pressing down on my mind, and I realized that our time was running out. It knows, the Whisperer said. It knows that the binding has been broken, that the resistance is awakening. The harvest will begin soon, Dr. Clark. The question is whether humanity will face it as cattle or as warriors. I closed my eyes and made my choice. When I opened them again, the world looked different. I could see the threads of manipulation that connected every human institution, every government, every corporation. I could see the subtle influences that had shaped human development for millennia. And I could see the other resistors, humans, giants, and things that had never been either, waiting in the shadows for the war to begin. Welcome to the resistance, Dr. Clark, the Whisperer said. Now, let's prepare humanity for the fight of its life. The ancient war was over. The real war was just beginning.